Huh, I wonder what this is.
It's for the way you look
Wait,
at
Riya?
me.
No. No! Let's
It's
research.
for the
Okay, here's what we found. Why'd you write a cake recipe?
Pranavi, we don't talk about cake.
Anyways. Everyone knows about the Civil Rights Movement. It was a time in US history that led to massive amounts of change in terms of racial equality. Rosa Parks, Martin Luther King Jr., and many other activists have been leading pioneers in the struggle for equality.
But one such important story is about the 4 college students who changed their local lunch counter to serve everyone, not just white people, shifting perspectives of racism around the country.
Now, as many know, racism across the country was prevalent in law and society before the 1960s. This racial injustice was enforced by Jim Crow laws, rooting hatred and unjust standards in our country's foundation. A famous court case, Plessy v. Ferguson, taking place in 1896, ended up enforcing the rule that different races should be separate but equal. This court case laid the foundation for segregation, eventually leading for prejudices to take the stage and undermine the Equal Protection Clause, which guaranteed safety for all races, including the formerly enslaved, per the 14th Amendment.
While the newfound laws were in place, many people had different opinions about the protests that were occurring around the country, specifically sit-ins, with one of the main two being that the nonviolent protests were paving the way for a new, equal future for all. However, the other prominent perspective on the activism was that equality was communist and that white supremacy was the correct choice for our country.
One side of the movement was taken by the black clergy, or the black operative churches. This group was very supportive of the Civil Rights Movement, serving as the only independent institution controlled by the black community. That was why the clergy was so good at providing a safe space for the activists who met and trained under the guidance of their common faith. The churches and the clergy served as a hotspot for the movement in both symbolic and logistical ways.
Another side of the movement was within the public relations and the business realm. The Civil Rights Movement wasn't just about the laws, it was about day-to-day life and equality.
So the protesters targeted businesses and began protesting their services, hoping to impact racist policies within their businesses.
Having a businessman abiding to the laws to maintain reputation and uphold the standards of the time. The laws at the time were preventing black people from participating in similar activities as white people. So it was the commonly accepted store policy. Within weeks, demonstrations erupted across the country, pressuring businesses into giving African Americans their rights.
Finally, the last main group of people involved in the Civil Rights Movement were students and young people who wanted to see the world change. Even if the involved youth had to put their studies or their lives on hold, they ended up gaining life skills that made them successful later in their life. Youth involved in the protests is a controversial subject even today, and activist organizations, even if they try their best, cannot truly keep adolescents and young adults safe while they are protesting. Nevertheless, these brave kids try to make a difference in the world that they live in.
Children have experienced police brutality when protesting the limits on their lives, but nevertheless, that never stopped young people from taking part. These children were all brave souls for defending what they believed was right. The youngsters supported multiple movements throughout the civil rights activism. Some even started their own protests, leading up to a protest started by 4 students from Greensboro to challenge racist ideals in their local lunch counter.
The Greensboro sit-ins, taking place in Greensboro, North Carolina, began on February 1st, 1960. 4 black students from the North Carolina Agricultural and Tech College, known as Joseph McNeil, Azel Blair, Franklin McCain, and David Richmond, or the Greensboro Four, came to Woolworth, purchased some toothpaste and school supplies, and sat down at the reserved lunch counter for whites. But that day, they hadn't come to Woolworths merely to sit. They had come to win equality.
They asked the waitress if she could serve them, to which she replied, "I'm sorry, we don't serve coloreds in here." They protested, stating that they had been served when given the supplies and toothpaste, but even after more refusals to be served, they didn't budge until the counter closed.
The next day, 23 more students arrived and participated in the sit-ins, and by February 5th, over 300 students clogged Greensboro Woolworths, and media coverage spread the anti-segregation protests across the country.
The news noticed the sit-ins and started reporting them. This led to multiple similar demonstrations around the country. In other words, the Greensboro sit-ins started a chain reaction that changed racism around the country.
As protests gathered and more people supported racial equality, it became common to be harassed as protesters. To keep their nonviolent demeanor strong, activists began to train others to withstand the persecution shown by opposers. They had to endure police brutality, food being thrown at them, and much more.
As this event continued to escalate, less people came into Woolworths. Soon, the downtown stores found that their business was falling off. Woolworth's sales fell by 20% because many whites were staying away to avoid trouble.
Their defiance heightened many Americans' awareness of racial injustice and ultimately led to the desegregation of the F.W. Woolworth lunch counter on July 25, 1960. This allowed for everyone, no matter the color of their skin, to have access to the same amenities. When this news spread, it became clear that times were changing. Therefore, many businesses had to change their policies too, to keep afloat in the economic market.
Finally, after decades of activism and fighting for equality, people realized that we couldn't progress as a separate country. Removing the segregation laws allowed for the United States of America to live up to its name, united as one.
L is for the way you look.
I thought we agreed not to bake that cake.
Do you want the cake or not?
I see. V is very, very extraordinary. E is even more than anyone that you adore can love.